could do with taking my emotions out of things a little bit and looking at those closest to me. Which brings me to you, Stephen. Yeah, we had a conversation. I don't think you're a traitor.
They've done it again. The faithfuls have once again failed to catch a traitor when from the outside this looks so blindingly obvious. The Traitors is back for season 4 and it's just as gripping, infuriating, compelling, hilarious as ever, with just as much a mess of group dynamics and logical fallacies. In short, The Traitors is a psychological game show in which 20-odd contestants enter a castle as faithfuls, apart from 3 of them who are secretly picked to play as the traitors. And their job is to every night choose one contestant to murder or eliminate from the show, and then every evening, all of the contestants meet around the round table and vote on one player to be banished based on who they think the traitors are. All the contestants are slowly whittled down until in the final, all the remaining players then split the prize money. However, if there are any traitors in the final, they take all the money for themselves. At the time of recording this, 9 episodes have already been out. I know I wanted to make more videos on this, but I was busy with work and also a massive 3.5 hour video you might have noticed I released recently. I haven't gotten around to the traitors until now, so you're going to get 2 videos, and this one is focusing on something really interesting and seemingly bizarre that happened in episodes 8 and 9 that I want to talk about more. There will be spoilers. I am a therapist. These are my thoughts on the traitors, and here is a cool train. So what I want to talk about is traitor Stephen, who has been starting to get a bit more heat on him, especially from the contestant Jessie. He is faced with a big dilemma and he does something that he fears is a massive risk, could backfire, could put a target on his back, and so he spends all of episode 9 really worried he's going to be banished. Only no one votes for him. No one at all. They've completely forgotten all of the suspicion on Stephen. He is absolutely fine. Why? Why is he fine? No, we can answer an even better question than that. Why was Stephen's behaviour the exact right thing to do? Not only in this scenario, but almost every scenario like it. And what can that teach us about what I think could be a really effective way to play this game? You will see what I'm on about soon enough, but let me fill you in with the backstory first. Basically, Jessie is onto Stephen. She's often been quite suspicious of him, but now she's growing in certainty due to a new theory that reaches back to the earliest episodes, based on what this contestant Ben said right before he was picked for murder. Ben thought Ross was a traitor, and in the library with a select group of people, he said, "I think Ross is a traitor. If I'm murdered tonight, Ross is a traitor," or words to that effect in a Scottish accent.
If any one of you are a traitor and he's a traitor, you'll get it back to him tonight and I'll be out tomorrow. I'll be murdered tonight.
And so Ben then was murdered and people scrutinised Ross for it, where Ross, knowing he was a faithful, correctly deduced that the traitors were setting him up in this. He thought the traitors must have heard Ben say that about me and then deliberately picked him to be murdered in order to implicate me, which means at least one person in that room in the library must have been a traitor. That was the last conversation of the night. Either Stephen, Fiona, Ellie, Jessie or James must be a traitor. Anyway, people were suspicious of Ross, so he was voted out and proven innocent, and then Fiona, who is a traitor, was later voted out, and this put an end to the library theory because she was in that room, she was a traitor. The theory was proven correct, it's done with now, right? Not quite. Jessie returned with a second theory. What if there were 2 traitors in that library room, Fiona and someone else? And then basically Jessie considered another clue. There's a task where 9 people are put in cages. During the task, 5 of them can be freed, but the remaining 4 are then up for murder. The traitors decide who goes in the cages and can put themselves in if they wish to. And we have seen a scenario like this time and time again in this show, in previous seasons, in the US version. Just because a traitor might place themselves in one of these cages or coffins or whatever it is, contestants then readily assume there must at least be one traitor in there. Even though both logic and history suggests it would be a bad idea for a traitor to place themselves inside one of these things because it would put them under just unnecessary scrutiny, Readily, contestants always buy into this kind of theory, and what's so appealing with these kind of theories is that it does allow you to narrow down your scope from all 20 contestants to just 9 in this example. If I decide a traitor must have put themselves in one of these cages, I now only have to consider these 9 people. Jessie took it further, basically realising that the only player still in the game who was both in a cage and in that library room was Stephen, which isn't necessarily proof of anything, but it does feel compelling. It does sound compelling when you get to join 2 dots like that, you know? Add to that, she also remembered how ready Stephen was to vote out Fiona after this library room theory surfaced, despite the fact he was close to her. If he was a traitor, obviously he would be keen then to vote Fiona out, because then that would put this theory to bed. It would bring heat off of me. And yeah, you know, all of this from Jessie is not a watertight theory. There are a lot of holes in here, and we've seen people in previous seasons make these kind of deductions and charge completely down rabbit holes as a result of it. But also in a game where there's no conclusive evidence for anything, it's as good as you can hope for. And is ultimately correct. Stephen is a traitor. With how persistent Jessie was with the library theory the first time around, she's unlikely to let this one go again. She will probably keep pushing Stephen's name, so what does Stephen do? This is now his big dilemma. Does he murder her knowing it might put a lot of heat on him? Jessie just accused me of being a traitor and then suddenly she's murdered? Obviously everyone will be suspicious of me. Or does he keep her in but risk being banished if she keeps voicing doubt against him, if she sways other people's votes? The undeniably correct decision, in my opinion, is to murder Jessie. And, I mean, that's kind of an obvious thing to say because it's been proven correct. Nobody at all did go to vote for Stephen. However, there are both interesting reasons for this and also interesting reasons that can be applied to a ton of other similar scenarios throughout this show. And I think point to a line of thinking you don't see contestants employ often enough. With the backstory out of the way, let's now consider it.
I didn't come in here alone. I actually came in with my boyfriend.
World Anvil! World Anvil! Yep, they are sponsoring this video. World Anvil is an online tool for game masters, for writers, for tabletop RPG players and world builders. An online tool for designing worlds, creating characters, chronicling history, planning and managing campaigns from a plethora of different games. My best friend uses it for our D&D campaign, I use it for planning my novel. Far better and easier than the scraps of random A4 paper stuffed into a drawer that used to constitute my creative process. Not only can I keep everything in one place where I can easily edit anything I want to, but I can create timelines, hyperlinks branching off to specific characters or articles, family trees, a billion other things. You can even link them all to maps, like here's this basic map I made years ago. If I click on the character test, it sends me straight to her page where everything is redacted, and that's like the most basic thing you can do with your maps. There's other creators whose world building looks so much nicer than mine. There's a whole community network on World Anvil if that's your thing. There's so many different cool features for everything you may possibly need. In general, there's been lots of great updates recently, making the interface even simpler and smoother than it already was. World Anvil is great. I am genuinely passionate, I hope you can hear that, and if you desire, if you crave, if you call to the heavens for a 51% discount, then use the code TREE, or click the link in the description or the pinned comment, and if you just want to try out the free version, then go for it. There's no time limit, test it out for as long as you want. World Anvil. Firstly, what Stephen is doing here in essence is taking a gamble with good odds. Nothing is guaranteed in social situations like this with so many variables, so you never know exactly what's going to happen, but it's technically 3 different gambles, I suppose. One is whether or not they will actually link Jessie's murder back to you. What's their initial reaction going to be? Either they think it does make you a target, or they conclude it's too obvious Stephen would do that if he was a traitor. He must be being framed. So that's one gamble. How do they react initially? The second gamble is whether or not anything dramatic enough will happen the following day, or someone will will voice a different theory that draws attention elsewhere. You know, will something else interesting happens that make this whole Jessie thing old news so that people forget about the heat. And the third is whether or not you as traitors can successfully use your influence well enough to direct attention elsewhere. That's 3 different points that all have to go wrong for you to get banished, and I think in most situations those are pretty good odds there, especially so in this situation. One, because, and I might be wrong in this, but I'm fairly sure I read somewhere a few years back that they don't actually film the round tables every single day, it's every 3 days, edited to look like each day, which means there's a lot of time for people to forget about this in place of something new. It's not very fresh when you come to the next round table, you know? Secondly, I think both Stephen and Rachel have proven themselves to be very competent traitors, who do also have a lot of influence over the group, even outside of the game, just as people. They are well liked and their opinions are respected. We see Ellie in episode 9 very keen to see what Rachel's opinions are. Roxy, who was suspicious of Stephen as a result of Jessie's murder, she went and spoke to him about it, and he handled that conversation incredibly well for someone who does always go red when they lie. Stephen didn't take it personally, he didn't go overboard arguing all sorts of logical evidence, because I think in that scenario of a one-to-one conversation, it is better to just play it like a friend who is trying to support her when she's feeling troubled here. On the surface, Roxy is going to him asking, "Are you a traitor, Stephen?" But the kind of subtext of this conversation is that Roxy is feeling stressed about the idea that she has to be suspicious of her friends. She feels guilty that she feels suspicious of Stephen. She wants his reassurance that he doesn't mind. That's the bit he mostly focuses on in this conversation, and I think that's the right way to handle this. The suspicion then allows them to kind of draw closer. He then does get to be quite genuine in his support for her. Thirdly, Stephen can trust Rachel will back him up. They have been a very united team in a way that I do enjoy, and I am interested to see if that remains the case as the pressure of the final builds. But if you can trust your fellow traitor to not turn on you at the first sign of pressure, then I think it's definitely worth risking the heat. And then, most importantly, the bit I want to talk about is the history of this season. The group's past shared experiences that inform their approaches going ahead. Ben accused Ross of being a traitor, and then when Ben was murdered, everyone thought Ross was indeed a traitor until he was voted out and proven innocent. That happened. They all felt bad for voting Ross out as a result of this. It's not a mistake they would want to repeat again, and so it makes it less likely they would. As a result, roll round to a scenario that's exactly the same, Jessie accusing Stephen and then being murdered. It's now more likely you learn from the past experience and make the different conclusion, that Stephen isn't a traitor, he is being framed just like Ross was. And in a slightly different scenario, you can also somewhat compare to Amanda, who was proven a faithful when voted out. She had accused Sam of being a traitor. Her word was one of the consistent criticisms against Sam that led to him being voted out, only he was proven to be innocent too. So if we shouldn't take Amanda's word as gospel despite her being proven a faithful, why should we believe Jessie to be any more accurate? These sort of things could go in a completely different direction. If Ben had been murdered and then Ross had actually been a traitor when he was voted out, I suspect the group would take this all very differently now. And so I think this is a line of consideration you never see enough from the traitors. To try and predict how the group might react to your next planned move based on previous similar events they have all gone through as a group. What might they have learned from past events that could inform how they respond to what I'm planning to do? You can't guarantee anything, of course, because people will have individual perspectives and reactions based on their own experiences before this game. However, when you go through something together in the immediate that is emotionally intense, this whole game show is designed to be emotionally intense. I think people underrate how intense this would be. There's then a much higher chance than normal that it would shape your gameplay going ahead, and therefore I think it's a pretty good indicator for reading the game. And similarly, I think Faithfuls could try to do the reverse. Based on the past experiences we've all gone through as a group, how might the traitors predict we would react to this murder or this banishment or whatever event? How might they predict we would react, and does that give us any clues? It would be incredibly hard to manage that line of thinking when you're in this scenario, because it involves so much retrospection when there's so many other things you have to think about and there's so much stress. But I do think it's worth attempting. I think contestants often go into this making lots of notes about who voted for who, and that is important, but do they make enough notes about the big emotional events and the big learned experiences they might be taking away as a group? What subconsciously might we as a group be taking from these experiences that I can then use to infer might affect decision making going ahead? We could say all of this in relation to the Stephen and Jessie example, or we could just say there's a much more obvious, pretty straightforward reason Stephen should definitely have murdered Jessie then. And that's because if Stephen was actually innocent in a world where he is a faithful, why the hell would the traitors not murder Jessie? I mean, unlike the Ross scenario, there's no risk of anything being led back to them here. Why would you not murder Jessie to try and implicate Stephen if he was innocent? Even if it doesn't pay off, there's no risk to doing that. It's an obvious thing to do. And so if they didn't murder Jessie, and therefore didn't try to implicate Stephen, at least in this situation anyway, where they're so late into the game with much less variables, I think that could look suspicious. If the traitors don't try to implicate him when it would be very easy to do so, you then question, are they defending him? If so, is Stephen a traitor? By that logic, murdering Jessie is actually the best way for Stephen to blend in here, despite it technically putting some heat on him. Probably. And that probably is what sums up why all these contestants find this game so hard, because you can't know for certain how all the other players will react, what lines of thinking they are going to take. Maybe they won't consider any of this at all, and that can completely blow apart your predictions, but I think it's still a better probability and a better bet than otherwise. I don't think it means Stephen and Rachel are out of the woods at all yet. I suspect Jessie's thoughts will be brought up again, but it nonetheless helped him to survive a little longer. These are my thoughts on the Traitors Season 4, or some of my thoughts. There's another video I'm keen to try and make pretty soon, so look out for that. As this is, let me know what you think. Comment your thoughts, good or bad. What factors didn't I discuss? There are definitely more. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe, maybe even support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Luke Hoare, Michael Gallagher, Ben Marie, Thafy, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.